toast! You are running, adrenaline pushing you much farther than the endurance would normally allow for, desperately trying to put distance between you and those heavy footsteps coming up behind you. The corridors are like a maze. You take a left, and a right, and another right, and before you know it, you are hopelessly lost. Stop and listen. It's quiet. Then, like a demented version of the Kool-Aid Man, you burst through the wall, ready to tear you limb from limb. You like that? Like that?
It was perfect. It was good.
It's actually inspired from a review I read about Resident Evil 4. They didn't want to spoil anything, so they just wrote this really good piece of fiction. And I was like, sold. I wish every single fucking review did that.
I'm kind of hung up on like an evil Kool-Aid Man bursting through to try and kill me. That's pretty scary.
So, we call them pursuer enemies. In the movies, these are the Jasons and the Michael Myers. In the games, people probably conjure up thoughts of Mr. X or Pyramid Head. It's the relentless force that will stop at nothing to get their prey. These are the enemies that scarred us emotionally, and we love them for it. So let's set some ground rules here. Thani, what is the hallmark of a pursuer enemy?
Definitely two key points. It's always a unique enemy. You'll end up meeting it several points in the game, and you can't really kill him until the very end. Sometimes even never. Sometimes you just escape them. That's pretty good enough, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the most noteworthy pursuer of recent times would be Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 Remake. Not only is he terrifying, but he also is supremely memeable. I know that there are several Twitter accounts that tweet out as Mr. X, generally with a big smile on his face. He's super cute.
He's gonna give it to you.
Yeah, and so let's talk about... I see what you did there. Might just have to put that meme in.
Yes.
Jesus, stay back!
This is what you hear and listen. This is what you hear and listen. X gon' give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on.
Let's talk about some really good examples of good versions of the Pursuer. And I know that you could talk for hours about this. Please explain to the viewers a little bit about the Hunter from Dead Space.
Oh, okay, perfect. Dead Space is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and you're right, I could gush about Dead Space endlessly, but I will try and limit myself here and keep to the Hunter specifically, how they did him bad in Dead Space 3, but in Dead Space 1, my good man, the Hunter is a fantastic enemy. So what he is, and I'm sure you know, but for anyone who doesn't know, the Hunter in Dead Space 1 is a necromorph that regenerates limbs. If you were to break them off, he would just grow them back. And he usually will only grow them back once you knock off all the limbs, but if you try and get cheeky and not knock them all off, then he'll just grow a couple and then run at you. It's pretty spooky. His build-up, he starts off in a little test tube, bursts out when you think that he's just like a dead corpse, but of course not. I mean, this is Dead Space.
Of course.
And then he proceeds to chase you for the rest of the game until you lose him. He'll make his way through the ship and stalk you at different times to surprise you, of course, like, oh god, it's him. Literally any time that you hear his signature noise in the vents or any other part in the game, but not until near the very end can you actually kill him, where you need to incinerate him in basically with the spaceship turbines, I believe.
The Hunter is such a classic example of a pursuer, and what makes him so great is that in Dead Space, you progressively grow stronger and you're able to handle all of the enemies that the game throws at you through suit upgrades and weapon upgrades and stuff like that. So having an enemy that is immune to all of your new and fancy gadgets will allow the game to keep some of the tension that it would have otherwise lost.
Indeed. And despite getting stronger, I really like that the Hunter, despite despite you getting stronger and smarter with dealing with him, you can't kill him until finally you get the rare opportunity, and you have to think outside the box too, because the game doesn't say, hey, you need to do this. You just see that there's a spaceship powering up, and if you freeze him, make sure he can't regen or run away from it, run into the control room and burn him alive, finally you can see his slow end, and the satisfaction of finally killing that pursuer is really good. Very good pursuer enemy.
You can build whole games around this concept, and there have been, like Alien Isolation, where most of the game is you trying to avoid becoming lunch of one of the aliens right there.
Yes, oh my god, the alien is such a good pursuer, and in every way, such a great AI. A lot of people don't really like Alien Isolation because it kind of drags on near like the mid to late to end game, but I think we can all agree that as far as the alien goes, he is such a genius AI because he adapts to what you do. If you hide under desks more often, he'll check desks more often. If you hide in lockers and stuff more often, he'll check those. If you go into the vents too much, he'll try and bait you out because he'll know that you're in there, as he has been stalking you like a proper pursuer enemy. It's so cool. I love him. That alien's so good.
Oh yeah, and another enemy, I think one of the first real pursuer enemies is from the game Clock Tower, where you have this scissor man running at you with a scissor, and in the original game he looks like a little goblin.
Yes, he does.
He's the most non-threatening serial killer I have ever seen. He's like a goblin, half the size of your average woman, and he's limping.
But he's got big scissors lost.
Yeah, but he can barely fucking lift those things. I mean, it must be so unwieldy.
Yeah. I feel like you'd have to be pretty big and muscular to make those work, and the little shrimp that is that guy would probably... Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Alright, so let's get into the meat of the video here. Let's talk about the Pursuer from Dark Souls 2 and why we think it was such a waste of potential. Donnie, could you explain to everybody at home just who is the Pursuer?
Oh, of course. In Dark Souls 2, one of the most famous enemies and the defining feature of Scholar of the First Sin actually is the Pursuer. He is an early game boss enemy that you kill and basically never see again, actually.
Even though he's called the Pursuer.
Yes, it completely defeats the purpose of him being a pursuer and stalking you. Now, you just take him out early.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, this has all the ingredients to create an iconic character. So in the early game, you find this big ass platform with basically nothing on it. And if you climb a ladder, then suddenly, whoosh, there's a bird that flies just above your head and it's carrying something. And that something is like this knight, and you can't really see him all that well, but you see the bird flying in the distance, and then it does a U-turn. And it comes at you, and it dives at you, and in its claws is the Pursuer, and it drops that Pursuer, and he falls to the ground, and it just proceeds to utterly destroy you.
Especially when, like you said, you go on the platform, and he just shows up. He doesn't even have like a boss health bar or anything, but this super menacing knight appears out of seemingly nowhere. It's like, oh god, I just started the game, I'm gonna die, and it's usually what happens.
Yeah. So, unfortunately though, in the base game, you basically got that really cool cutscene, and then you got a cool cutscene for the boss fight, but you only met him like twice. In Scholar of the First Sin, they changed that so he would appear multiple times, but also he kind of appears in pairs at one point. He kind of fits into that trope of an early game boss that turns into a normal enemy later on. And that's kind of sad.
It's really weird, actually, because now that I think about it, if the Pursuer is supposed to be like this unique knight, why do two of them spawn later on?
And to be fair, I don't know in the lore if he's supposed to be alone or if maybe he was part of a knight squad, if you will. But these enemies are usually the coolest ones, and they tend to be there alone. I mean, these enemies are the ones that become iconic. You know, you have You have the alien, you have Nemesis from Resident Evil 3, Mr. X, the Hunter from Dead Space, the Scissor Goblin, if you will. Outlast has that big meaty boy. What was his name? Chris...
Oh yeah, Chris Walker, yes!
Walker, right.
You have a couple different hunters in that game, but Chris Walker is so intimidating because he's the first pursuer.
So, bringing it back to the Dark Souls 2 Pursuer, the great tragedy is that with a few changes, this boss would be way more iconic. I mean, it could reach Ornstein and small levels, I really think so. Firstly, move the boss fight to the end of the game and make him optional. At least I always think of the optional bosses as way more difficult and badass than the other ones. Secondly, do better with the foreshadowing. They have already set up that he drops down from a bird at this point, so why not keep that theme going? There is a level in Dark Souls 2 called the Lost Bastille, which is a fortress on the water, and just imagine having the bird circling around that fortress, squawking every time it sees you, and every time it sees you or every time you spend too much time on the outside, that bird's dive down and just releases the pursuer and it starts hunting you in that area. Or if you want to have him inside the building, how about there be some sort of mystical purplish energy convalescing on the ground, and it takes a few moments and you hear like a sound effect or something and you know it's coming and the screen starts shaking and boom, there is. There should be at least a little bit of build up before he shows up. That's gonna be very important.
You just gave me a perfect idea. You know, I think it's the Lost Sinner, is that her name? At the end of the Lost Bastille. Imagine him dropping down under that little narrow ridgeway to stop you right before you're about to get there, like this last obstacle.
Oh, that would be so cool, actually. There's so much to work with there. You should pop up in just the worst times, and that's what makes these characters great. And hell, you know what I would have done? Even at the end of maybe the boss fight, the Lost Sinner, when you got her health down to almost nothing, maybe then, boom, the pursuer drops down, kills her, and then just absorbs the soul, and you have to fight him there as well.
That's awesome. And then he gets low and maybe he leaves and he becomes a returning enemy that's slowly getting stronger.
Yeah.
Something like that. Oh my goodness, that's really cool. I like that.
So foreshadowing is, of course, a really big part of it, because you talked about the hunter. You could hear the noises that it makes in the vents, right? And it's a unique noise.
Oh yes, and there's one part too, Lost, in the game where you have to go into a big part of the ship where there's no air, so it's almost completely quiet, and guess who shows up to throw you off?
Of course, the hunter shows up.
It's so cool to have him just be, it's like, oh my god, like his telltale sign isn't there, but only for this part of the game, and they really throw you off, because it's good. It's really good.